You spend decades building a reputation, believing that hard work and loyalty are the ultimate currencies. Then, one Tuesday morning, you discover the people in charge think your experience is just a polite word for expired. My name is Margaret Sterling. I am 62 years old. Until 7:12 a.m. today, I was the lead director of the most important healthcare initiative Vanguard Medical Solutions had launched in a decade. We called it Project Apex. It was a remote care platform designed to bridge the gap between major urban hospitals, rural clinics, and homebound patients. For 8 exhausting, exhilarating months, my team and I lived and breathed this initiative. We navigated regulatory nightmares, smoothed over vendor disputes, and built a system that was actually going to save lives. Today was supposed to be the final rollout meeting, the finish line. I arrived at the office before the sun had fully risen. The executive floor was still quiet, the kind of corporate stillness that only exists before the phones start ringing. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and went straight to the project dashboard. I wanted to verify the presentation deck and ensure all vendor commitments were locked in. At the very top of my inbox was a message from the chief administrator of our largest hospital partner. Margaret, we are officially signing off on the integration. We had our doubts about Vanguard's timelines, but your team proved this platform can actually deliver. We are moving forward because of your leadership. I sat back and read that sentence a second time. When you've been in the workforce as long as I have, you stop looking for gold stars. You just want the work to succeed. But there is a very thick, bright line between doing your job quietly and letting someone else take advantage of you. I smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and clicked on the vendor archive folder to pull the final contracts. A gray dialog box popped up. Error 403, access denied. I frowned, assuming it was a routine server glitch, and refreshed the page. Access denied. My heart gave a strange, hollow thump. That file directory had been under my exclusive control since the day I drafted the original charter. I walked down the glass-paneled corridor toward the office of Thomas Reed, the CEO's chief of staff. He was already at his desk, swiping through his tablet. "Thomas," I said, keeping my voice level, "why is the Project Apex vendor archive suddenly restricted?" He didn't even look up. "It's just an executive visibility restructuring." "Margaret, that's corporate jargon." "Thomas, it's not an answer. I need those files for the rollout meeting in 2 hours. It's a temporary lock." His tone was flat, dismissive. It was a clear signal that the conversation was over. I turned around and headed toward the conference wing. That was when I saw her, Chloe Jenkins, the new intern. She was stepping out of the CEO's private suite, carrying a tablet tucked under her arm. On the screen was the unmistakable title slide of my presentation deck. But what caught my eye wasn't the tablet. It was the blue lanyard around her neck. Her badge was flashing a solid green light, a level of unrestricted executive access that interns simply do not get. 2 product managers from my own division walked past me. Their voices dropped into that hushed, conspiratorial tone people use when they know something you don't. "She's been in private prep meetings with him all week." One whispered, "I thought Margaret knew." The other replied, "Knew what?" Both of them caught sight of me and immediately looked down at the carpet. Hurrying away, a cold clarity washed over me. I walked back to my desk, opened the company's master calendar, and clicked on the agenda for the 9 a.m. rollout meeting. My name was gone. The agenda line that had proudly displayed my title for the last 8 months had been completely rewritten. It now read, Project Ape. Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear. Apex presentation, led by strategic advisor Chloe Jenkins. I stared at the glowing monitor. 8 months of late nights and relentless problem solving hadn't vanished into thin air. Someone had deliberately reached in and stolen it. The question echoing in my mind wasn't how they had managed to replace me overnight. It was much simpler. When exactly did Richard Vance, our esteemed CEO, decide that I was too old to finish the house I built? The hallway leading to the executive boardroom is all glass. Glass walls, glass doors, and glass reflections of people desperately pretending they aren't watching you. I caught up with Thomas Reed just outside the CEO's office. Thomas? He stopped, his shoulders tensing. My name was removed from the Apex leadership list last night. I said, my hands calmly folded in front of me. That directive came straight from Richard's office. He replied smoothly. That tells me where it came from. Thomas. It doesn't explain why. It is the final decision. Since when does a CEO completely restructure a project's leadership 12 hours before the final rollout? Without consulting the project lead, Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked everywhere but at my face. Since he decided the initiative needs a fresher perspective for the final push, fresher? When you hit your 60s, you become fluent in a specific corporate dialect. You recognize polite words designed to cut you off at the knees. Fresher, more energetic. A newer approach. Before I could respond, Chloe Jenkins appeared. The new intern glided down the hallway, clutching my presentation deck to her chest as if she had designed every slide herself. She offered me a bright, wide smile. Good morning. Margaret, she chirped. Then, her voice dropped into manufactured sympathy. Richard asked me to walk the hospital board through the rollout today. I hope you don't mind. I looked at the tablet in her hands. That deck is mine. Chloe, every data point in it belongs to my team. She lowered her eyes, executing a perfect display of false humility. I reviewed it carefully last night. Richard just felt the presentation needed some younger energy to really sell the vision. Behind her, a junior analyst froze in his tracks, then scurried into an alcove. They all knew exactly what was happening. They just hoped I would be too shocked, or too polite, to make a scene. My cell phone vibrated. It was my sister, Clara, a retired corporate lawyer. I stepped away and answered. Margaret, Clara said, her voice serious. Tread lightly today. Men at the top of the food chain do not forgive women who make them look foolish. Through the glass wall, I watched the conference room fill, and right at the center of the mahogany table, in the seat I had occupied for nearly a year, sat Chloe Jenkins. My chair, my data, her spotlight. I have to go. Clara, I said quietly. I hung up and opened my briefcase. If Richard Vance wanted to erase my legacy, he should have been smart enough to erase the digital footprints first. By the time I walked into the boardroom, there wasn't an empty seat left. Department heads lined the walls. On the massive video screens, 3 of our biggest hospital partners were dialed in. The atmosphere was thick with uncomfortable silence. No one made eye contact. I walked straight to the table, placed my heavy leather binder down with a solid thud, and took the only remaining chair near the end. A minute later, Richard Vance walked in. He walked to the head of the table, his eyes sweeping across the room until they locked onto me. A brief flash of irritation crossed his face. Let's get started, Richard announced, his voice booming. As of today, Project Apex is being repositioned under fresher, more dynamic leadership. The room went dead silent. I leaned forward. Whose leadership? Exactly, Richard. He turned toward the center of the table. Chloe Jenkins will be stepping in to serve as our strategic advisor moving forward. A muffled voice from the back row muttered. The intern, Richard, ignored it. Margaret built a solid early framework, he said, offering me a patronizing nod, but the final implementation requires a different kind of energy. Margaret, you'll assist Chloe during the transition period. Assist? 8 months of grinding work, building contracts from scratch. And now, I was being publicly ordered to act as a secretary for a 22-year-old sitting in my chair. Chloe looked down at her hands with a practiced smile. I'll do my absolute best to continue Margaret's hard work. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the head of IT. He was quietly lifting his smartphone, resting it against his coffee mug. He was recording the meeting. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I opened my binder, smoothed out the top page, and looked at Richard Vance. Richard, you really should have reviewed the finalized hospital agreements before you decided to remove my name from this agenda. His patronizing smile faltered. What are you talking about? I closed the binder, and I added, my voice carrying clearly. You might want to have a conversation with your wife before this meeting goes any further. Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. Is that supposed to be a threat? Margaret, no, I said calmly, picking up my things. It was supposed to be a warning. I turned my back on the CEO and walked out. As soon as the heavy glass doors clicked shut, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in 2 years. Eleanor Vance, the one person Richard never expected me to call. I found an empty huddle room 2 doors down, stepped inside, and closed the door. My hands were shaking slightly with adrenaline, but my mind was crystal clear. 2 years ago, during a massive internal audit, I stumbled across a compliance discrepancy the executive team was trying to bury. Eleanor Vance quietly reached out to me. We worked together behind the scenes to fix the issue before it triggered a federal investigation. Before we parted ways, she gave me her private cell number and said, if the governance of this company is ever legitimately at risk, you call me directly. I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring. Margaret. Her voice was elegant, calm, and entirely unsurprised. I didn't waste time complaining. I gave her the raw facts. Richard removed me from Project Apex this morning. He gave it to Chloe Jenkins, the new summer intern. There was a heavy pause. He announced it in the final rollout meeting. I continued. 3 of our largest hospital partners were dialed in on video. And how did the partners react? They signed those integration contracts specifically because of my team's framework. I have their letters of intent in writing. I could hear a keyboard clicking in the background. Was the meeting recorded? Margaret T. Yes, officially by the room cameras and unofficially by at least one director's phone. Furthermore, that the presentation deck Chloe used is entirely my original work. It has embedded timestamps proving my authorship. The temperature of Eleanor's voice dropped 10 degrees. Did she explicitly claim the materials as her own? She walked into the boardroom holding my deck, and Richard publicly instructed me to assist her. Everyone in the building had heard the whispered rumors about Richard and the intern. But rumors are just wind. Evidence is an entirely different beast. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Do not send a single email to Richard. Do not engage in any arguments with HR. Understood. And Margaret, do not, under any circumstances, leave that building today. The line went dead. Exactly 12 minutes later, every director on the Vanguard board received an encrypted email from Eleanor Vance, co-signed by Diane Croft, our general counsel, subject emergency executive misconduct filing. Attached were 3 things Richard Vance forgot to account for. The written commitments from the hospital partners demanding my leadership, the IT server logs showing his unauthorized file transfers, and the metadata proving my name was on every document Chloe Jenkins touched. The email ripped through the company faster than any press release ever could. Within minutes, the executive floor completely inverted. Phones rang in unison. Executive assistants sprinted down the hallways. Thomas Reed jogged past my desk, pale and sweating. He stopped and hovered near my cubicle. Legal wants you in conference room B, he said, terrified. Inside the windowless room sat Diane Croft, the general counsel. Take a seat. Margaret, Diane said gently. She tapped a button on her remote, and a frozen frame from the boardroom security camera appeared on the monitor. It showed Richard standing tall, Chloe beaming next to him. And my empty chair? Diane folded her hands. You need to understand something. Margaret, Richard Vance may hold the title of CEO, but he does not control Vanguard. She tapped her tablet, bringing up a legal document. The Vance Family Holding Trust, Section 4 Voting Authority. The controlling shares are held entirely by the family trust. Diane explained quietly. And the sole appointed trustee with active voting authority is Eleanor Vance. Richard had the corner office. His wife held the keys to the kingdom. The screen shifted to a cascade of digital records. Chloe's hiring paperwork missing 2 mandatory approvals. Conflict of interest checks bypassed completely. Server access logs showing Chloe downloading restricted Apex folders at 2 a.m. Diane looked at me over her glasses. This is no longer a simple HR complaint. This is a gross misuse of executive authority and a direct threat to multi-million-dollar contracts. Suddenly, the door flew open. Richard Vance stormed in, his face flushed with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" "Diane," he demanded. "Shut this ridiculous investigation down right now." "I am the CEO." Diane Croft didn't flinch. She calmly adjusted her glasses and looked Richard dead in the eye. "Eleanor has already cast her vote to convene an emergency session of the board. Well, you don't have the authority to shut anything down." For the very first time since I had met him, Richard Vance had absolutely nothing to say. By the time I walked back to my desk to pack up for the evening, the entire building felt like it was holding its breath. My cell phone buzzed. A text message from one of the senior product managers. "Thought you should have this for your records." Attached was the high-resolution video file shot from the AT director's phone. A second message immediately followed. "In case someone gets pressured to erase the server copy, we've got your back." I stared at the screen, a lump forming in my throat. I typed 2 words back. "Thank you." Then, my phone started vibrating relentlessly. A screenshot of Chloe's fast-tracked access approval, a forwarded calendar invite proving secret prep meetings. A note from a vendor coordinator. "Thomas told us we weren't allowed to CC you anymore. I'm so sorry." For 8 months, I had thought I was standing entirely alone. I hadn't been. The people around me had seen every injustice. They had just been waiting for someone brave enough to strike the first match. My phone rang. It was Clara. "Margaret, I heard a full board investigation has been triggered. Maybe you should take some paid leave. Let the lawyers handle it." I looked at the mountain of supportive messages flooding my screen. I spent 30 years of my career stepping out of the way to avoid the crossfire. I replied, "I'm not doing it anymore. I am not disappearing just because it makes a powerful man's life easier." Down the hallway, I could hear low voices drifting over the cubicle walls. He literally tried to give a massive project to an intern. I heard legal has him dead to rights. The story didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the building. At exactly 6:40 p.m., my phone lit up with a secure message from Diane Croft. "Come in early tomorrow." A minute later, a second message appeared. "The board vote just passed." I arrived at Vanguard headquarters just after 7 the next morning. The energy in the grand lobby was entirely different. Whispers echoed off the marble walls. They held an emergency vote at midnight. At 7:30 a.m., the revolving doors spun, and Richard Vance walked in. He carried himself with the same confident stride he used every morning. He approached the VIP executive turnstile, pulled out his gold-trimmed badge, and tapped it against the scanner. A sharp, electronic buzz echoed. A solid red light flashed on the gate. "Access denied." Richard frowned and tapped the badge again. Buzz, red light, conversations ground to a halt. All eyes turned to the turnstile. "There's a malfunction with your scanner." Richard snapped at the guard. Before the guard could reply, 2 senior corporate security directors stepped forward. "Mr. Vance," the lead director said, his voice carrying across the silent lobby, "your executive access privileges were revoked by a direct board order at 2 a.m. this morning." The entire lobby stopped breathing. The mask of the untouchable CEO slipped, revealing sheer panic underneath. He glanced across the lobby and locked eyes with me. The security director gestured toward a side door. "The board of directors is waiting for you upstairs, sir." He wasn't pointing to the private executive elevator. He was pointing to the service elevator. Richard followed the security men without a word. No one rushed to his side. The building simply stood by and watched him fall. 10 minutes later, I was called into the boardroom. The chairman looked down at a printed notice. "Effective immediately, Richard Vance is suspended as Chief Executive Officer." Over by the door, a woman from HR quietly collected Chloe Jenkins' company laptop and badge. Thomas Reed sat frozen in a corner chair. The chairman met my gaze. "Margaret, if the board officially restores Project Apex to your complete control today, can you still salvage the timeline?" I looked at the massive presentation screen. Then I looked at the empty leather chair at the center of the table. "Yes," I said firmly. "But moving forward, no one touches my data, my vendors, or my team without my name on the approval line." The chairman didn't hesitate. "Approved. By noon, a company-wide email hit every inbox. Richard Vance has been placed on indefinite administrative leave. Chloe Jenkins' internship has been terminated. Effective immediately, Thomas Reed has resigned. The reaction inside the building was a masterclass in corporate survival. Doors that had been shut tight yesterday were suddenly wide open. Across the hall, the lights in the CEO's private suite remained turned off. By mid-afternoon, the real fatal blow landed. Eleanor Vance formally filed for divorce. Formally. She had been meticulously preparing the legal filings for over 6 months. Chloe Jenkins hadn't been the cause. She was simply the undeniable public proof of Richard's carelessness that Eleanor needed to execute her exit strategy. Because the Vance Family Holding Trust held the controlling shares, Richard's position was completely obliterated. His compensation agreement contained an ironclad morality clause. His gross misuse of corporate resources triggered an automatic clawback. Unvested stock options, deferred bonuses. His massive severance package, all of it was suddenly frozen. The man who had strutted through the lobby believing he owned the world had lost his corner office, his reputation, and the wife whose quiet power had shielded him for years. Just before 5 o'clock, I received a direct email from the board. Project Apex is cleared to proceed under the direct and exclusive leadership of Margaret Sterling. I drafted a status update to our hospital partners, attached the finalized rollout schedule, and hit send. With my name right at the top, 1 week later, I walked back into the main executive boardroom for the official launch of Project Apex. Same thick glass walls, same mahogany table, but this time, there were no whispers, and the heavy leather chair at the center of the table was completely empty. Waiting for me. I placed my laptop on the table and took a seat in the center chair. "Let's get to work," I said. The chief administrator of our lead hospital partner unmuted his microphone on the video screen. "Margaret, we reviewed the board's recent actions. We just want to say on the record that we are incredibly comfortable continuing this partnership under your direction. Transparency and competence matter far more to us than flashy presentations." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the boardroom collectively exhaled. When the meeting concluded, the room emptied out. I stood up and pushed the heavy leather chair back under the table. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I just felt an immense, quiet sense of peace. That chair had never truly belonged to the intern, and it certainly hadn't belonged to a CEO who thought respect was something he could simply demand. It had just been waiting for the truth to catch up to the room. Later that evening, as I was packing my briefcase, my cell phone rang. It was Clara. "Margaret," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I wanted to call and say I was wrong. When I told you to keep your head down, I spent my entire career surviving in the corporate world by making myself small. But you didn't do that. You stood your ground, and you made them respect your name." I looked down at the printed project charter resting on my desk. Margaret Sterling, lead director. "No, Clara," I said softly. "I didn't make them respect it. I just made sure they couldn't erase it. And for the first time all week, I smiled. Because a lifetime of hard work, dignity, and integrity doesn't vanish into thin air just because one powerful, arrogant man decides it should." Hello, dear viewers of Her Fear. We received the notice that YouTube had disabled monetization for our channel. Since then, we have no longer had any income from YouTube. While producing each video still requires a great deal of work and expenses, such as script writing, editing, publishing content, and maintaining our team. However, to continue keeping this channel alive, we truly need your support. You can support us through the Ko-fi link placed in the video description, pinned comment, and community tab. Any support, no matter how small, means so much to us. Thank you sincerely to everyone who has continued to stay with and support Her Fear.